Maul clowns Marc Lamont Hill for saying men can have babies.
A straight, cisgender male cannot give birth is the same way a woman cannot apologize. It's just scientifically not wired that way.
That's not what Marc Lamont Hill thinks. He thinks that men can, in fact, have
No,
babies.
he doesn't.
He said it.
When?
He said that. With Candace Owens, he said it.
That's right, y'all. On the episode of Rory and Maul, Maul took shots at the newest co-host of the Joe Budden Podcast, Marc Lamont Hill. If you don't remember, Marc Lamont Hill was on the Candace Owens show, and he made the case that men who have transitioned into being, women can have babies.
I know trans men that can get pregnant.
That means it's a woman. Only one sex can get
that's
pregnant.
a circular argument. That's
it's not a circular argument.
Yeah.
It's proving my thing. There is a truth, a concrete truth. You have to be born with a uterus to have a baby. Only women can get pregnant. The fact that we've arrived in a society
right, that's the part I'm disagreeing with. That's the part I'm disagreeing
with. There's nothing to
with.
disagree with it. These are facts. So you can say that this person who is pregnant identifies as a man. That person was born a woman. I can tell you that every single time because only women can have sex because there are concrete truths about life.
And it was just something that I know he's received a lot of backlash for. Anytime I do a Marc Lamont Hill video, that is what is often commented in the YouTube section, like in the comment section. So we all know Maul is kind of a standard, modern, conservative person. So he would kind of be at the core standing against a lot of what Marc Lamont Hill espouses. But I'm not saying that that is only the sentiment of conservatives. A lot of people agree with Maul here. And this escalates, I think, the tension that is brewing between Rory and Maul and the Joe Budden Podcast. And it's not a tension that is new, but it's a tension that seems to transfer to every co-host on the podcast. I'm saying that, like, whether it be Flip or Melissa Ford, like Flip and Melissa Ford, to me, they have inherited the Rory and Maul beef. And I'm saying that because Flip, when he first got to the Joe Budden Podcast, he was taking shots at Rory and Maul left and right. He was standing up for Joe Budden all the time, making allusions to how Rory and Maul never took Joe to court, yet they calling Joe a thief. And it's just funny because ever since then, he seems to have some of the issues that, Rory and Maul had with Joe himself. And then Melissa Ford, she has actually taken part in this war as well, this podcast war. She laughs at the jokes very loudly that Joe makes about Rory and Maul. And then there was even that time where Melissa Ford made fun of Rory and his haircut, saying like, oh, he looks like a little baby with his haircut. So is Marc Lamont Hill now joining the fray because Maul took shots at his ideology? And I don't even know if Maul would know that Marc Lamont Hill is the newest member of the Joe Budden Podcast. Maybe he does, but I do think that both podcasts keep up with each other a lot. So it is perfectly reasonable to think that Maul is just want to make fun of the newest member of the Joe Budden Podcast, who is causing quite a bit of a stir in the Joe Budden Podcast fan universe, because some people hate that he has been added, some people love that he has been added, and some of the people who hate that he has been added are members of the Joe Budden Podcast. So I'm talking like Flip, talking like Ish, and Ice. Like, all of them seem to be apprehensive about Marc Lamont Hill joining the show, and Joe's reasoning for why he's doing it seemed poorly announced. He said he just wanted to give everyone one day off a month. Really odd. And he announced it on air, which seemed to catch everyone off guard. And I don't think this is COE. I think this is perfectly planned as the Joe Budden Podcast company network goes through a massive overhaul. It is a massive overhaul. They've added J1. They've added Marc Lamont Hill. And then on top of that, they just announced that Improper Improv is coming back. And in the odd announcement, they just posted a poster of Flip on like just his like profile and put Joe Budden Network in the corner. And a lot of people are like, Danny, Improper Improv's coming back. Still no date announced. Just a picture And the announcement of it is kind of interesting because the poster itself is just Flip, no one else. So no Joe Budden on the picture. And a lot of what made Improper Improv a success was actually Joe Budden's presence. And that's one of the jokes Joe Budden and Flip used to have, is Joe would say, well, you know, the numbers are different when I'm there versus when you there. But there was some episodes that Flip did by himself. I think there was like 1 or 2 that Flip did of Improper Improv without Joe there. And they did decent. They did okay. I don't think the numbers were as good without Joe. But the network keeps matriculating along. We'll see if it materializes in anything more than just more Joe Budden podcasts, because a lot of the Joe Budden shows end up just becoming like members of, like, they just become members of the pod. Like, Joe doesn't really launch new podcasts. The only thing he really got going right now is Improper Improv. And the timing of it is interesting as Melissa Ford launches her podcast. Sometimes I wonder if the Melissa Ford podcast was pitched to the Joe Budden Network and Joe was like, you know what, do your own thing. We don't really need that right now. And as a result, Melissa Ford launched the podcast on her YouTube channel. And it's kind of like a prove it. Let me see if you can do anything with yourself. And meanwhile, Flip got his own thing. It seems like the core of the Joe Budden Network believes in Flip more than Melissa Ford. Lastly, I wanted to end this video by circling back to Marc Lamont Hill. I recently saw that he followed me on Twitter and then unfollowed me a couple days later. And I think it's because Melissa Ford is upset. And I know Melissa Ford and Marc Lamont Hill are pretty close, or that type of fake industry close, you know, where they pretend like they like each other because they agree with each other on camera a lot. So Marc Lamont Hill, I just want to say good riddance. I don't need you to follow me. A lot of you pod members, when pod members follow you, they expect certain things. Like Joe did this same thing. He announced the unfollow and was like, I unfollowed you, Danny. It was just weird. And there's been some pushback into the way I've been covering Marc Lamont Hill. And all I have to say is I'm going to do what I want. I'm not going to cover people differently because some folks may know them. I'm not going to be covering people different because, you know, they're popular among certain crowds. My comments on Marc Lamont Hill remain. I think it's crazy that he went from the CNN to the JBP. And this is kind of a lifeline to Marc Lamont Hill as, you know, his YouTube channel is struggling. And I think being on the Joe Budden podcast will increase the profile of his YouTube channel because Marc Lamont Hill's smart. He's going to leave eventually, and so on and so forth. And I also want to end this video by noting that I saw the Patreon Friday for the Joe Budden podcast, and it was interesting. There was a lot of stuff said. I noticed that Melissa Ford is not the most fond of me. They were talking about me, and she said, don't say his name. Don't say Danny's name, please. Oh, Melissa Ford. I don't know. I keep getting annoyed by her, like, more and more as time goes on. Not even the name thing, because the pod has been bleeping out my name more and more, which is cool. I think that's dope. But Melissa Ford is just pretentious, sometimes obnoxious, and people want me to apologize to her. Not gonna happen. Not on my watch, buddy. You know that. People have said things about me. I don't go demanding apologies. It is what it is. We're all content creators. We say things about people, and that's that. But let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what you think about Maul clowning Marc Lamont Hill, making fun of him for saying that men can have babies. I know my comment section is going to go crazy because that is a hot button issue. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.